think we should go live now.
Okay, I'm starting the webinar now.
Just give me a cue when I should start. I still see people joining. Yeah, yeah, I think I see quite a few people have joined now, so we can begin the webinar. So first of all, welcome everybody who's joining our webinar today, and really a big welcome to the panelists who are also joining today. The purpose of this webinar is really quite straightforward. It's for all of us who have been working in development and feel like there are just better ways to do the work that we are. We're also getting a lot of discussion about, oh, we need to make our programs more innovative, and more donors are also requesting for it. And a lot of the times practitioners are like, but what does that actually mean? What is innovation? Is innovation about using new technologies? Do we have to use something entirely new? Where do you even start? Who do you even speak to? So today's webinar is really a collection of expertise from both PPAF and UNDP Pakistan's Innovation Accelerator Lab, where all these expertise, everyone here has actually tried and tested and failed and learned and continued and persisted on to do innovation in development. So we really hope for those of you who are joining today, if you really want to figure out what we mean by innovation for development, we really hope today you will get those real life examples of projects, real life examples of experiences, of bottlenecks, of frustrations, of opportunities, and of why we should do it. And of course, by the end of it, here you will have contacts also of people you can reach out to. So at the lab, for instance, we are very much focused this year on building a community of practitioners who are working in innovation for development and who are willing to learn. So we really want you to engage with us and continue following us on our innovation pages. And of course, the same with PPAF, as we're all looking for more partnerships and more like-minded people. So a question we get asked a lot is, why should we do innovation in development? And, I used to have many abstract kind of responses to this question. But because of COVID, I have a little bit more of a concrete answer. And you could see with COVID, as the pandemic hit, in our development programs, and in the way our organizations are structured, we were slow to respond. And that's because of the design of the way we work. It wasn't ready for a issue so complex. And the thing with the pandemic is it's not just a health crisis. It is at the start one, but there is issues in governance. There's issues in capacity. There's issues in technology. There's an aspect in there's even a gender aspect to this. There's inequality. All of these issues cannot be separate, isolated projects. If you want to address a multidisciplinary, complex development issue, you cannot address it with one project, document, and only focusing on one solution. So at the lab, we like to say very much that we are moving away from single point solutions and trying to create project designs that are working at a systems level, that create that systemic change. And so we create programs and projects that are now interconnected. We are taking more of a portfolio approach. So that is something the lab will discuss later today. You'll also see from PPAF, they will talk about their work and how they are using human-centered design and how they're using new investment mechanisms to fund the work that they're doing. Both organizations are trying to work with the private sector because as the problem is multidisciplinary, the stakeholders are also diverse that we need to work with. And with that comes new ways of working, which is what we like to call co-creation. It's beyond participatory development. It is also developing solutions and ideas together with your different stakeholders. So I will stop there and just sort of give you a quick run through of what we're planning for today. We will start off with case studies from each organization, and they will talk about their real life projects that they're working on. And then we will open into a dialogue with both PPF and our lab team to discuss these different tools, opportunities, challenges, and why we need to move and work in this way. And then we will have a Q&A. So if you're really interested, if you have burning questions, please type them in the chat. Please also type in the chat who you are, where are you from, what are you doing, what are you looking to learn from here. This is a safe space. This is a learning circle, and it's going to be a very informal dialogue. And because this is a new area, there must be stupid questions. Stupid questions are more than welcome. We don't need smart questions because we need to get on board and we need to figure out how. Okay, so we are going to first move on to PPAF. And we will have a presentation from Talha Ashraf, who's the Innovative Interventions Officer, and Tabir Athar, who's the Innovation Specialist for Business Development at PPF. So over to you, and yeah, good luck.
Thank you. I'll begin shortly, just as soon as we share the screen.
Can you guys see?
Yes.
Go ahead, Tala.
Thank you so much. So I'll just start off by introducing PPAF. So PPAF is an apex fund, and basically we have a mandate to alleviate poverty all across Pakistan. This means that we exclusively work in high poverty districts as per our poverty alleviation mandate. The way that PPAF operates is that we work exclusively through our partner organizations for implementation, which means that, again, as Binesh mentioned, co-creation is a big part and aspect of the whole design. So we will not independently be running projects, but again, we will be onboarding partner organizations for implementation. Particularly, there's always a component of institutions because we'll be working through community organizations and community support organizations. So we'd always want to bring up these institutions. Just to give you some really quick facts about PPAF, so far, we basically have a presence in 147 districts across Pakistan through 130 partner organizations. So far, we've also completed successfully around 38,000 projects around health, education, water, and infrastructure. We've also successfully provided around 1.8 million households with disaster relief and recovery assistance. We also have provided around 8.4 million microcredit loans with 60% women as clients, as well as 80% financing extended to rural areas. And in general, we've also extended around about 1.8 million interest-free loans. So that gives you a bit of context around the sort of vast portfolio that PPAF operates in. So now to give you a little more sort of context around the innovations unit, it was basically, it's a fairly new unit that was created around 2017. And it basically came out of a learning and a desire, because we saw that PPF often would be the first mover in a lot of places and spaces. And it would be doing a lot of really innovative work, but it wouldn't always be able to market it or showcase it, or even be defining it as innovative. So that's where basically the sort of unit came into being. The way that we sort of identify innovations within PPF, particularly in the context of its mandate, is an iterative process of adapting and improving methods of delivery to ensure more effective solutions for marginalized communities. Again, across all interventions that we do, we will always make sure that it aligns with our mandate of poverty alleviation, and there's always a strong upholding of social uplift. In terms of the past projects that we've done, most recently conducted, we did the art residency program, which was the first of its kind, a very fairly novel idea, which particularly targeted Indigenous music. The way that we basically defined the art residency is a musical journey out of poverty, particularly for Indigenous musicians, with a focus on marginalization of musicians within society, preserving Indigenous musical instruments, as well as the folk economy. We did this in collaboration with the Foundation for Arts, Culture and Education, FACE, and we tested out a systematic approach of graduating Indigenous musicians out of poverty. 20 musicians were selected across Pakistan, with one maestro and an apprentice identified, so we could also engage in peer-to-peer learning. It was an 18-day residency from the 15th of August 2020 to the 2nd of September, and all the musicians were basically gathered in Lok Virsa. We also made sure, as we've already mentioned, COVID challenges did play a huge role in this particular project and project design. So we made sure that we had COVID-19 response protocols as well as risk and mitigation plans when we were discussing this. And one of the key outcomes to come out of this particular project was a YouTube channel called Heritage Live that also worked on sort of releasing digital tracks as well as accompanying music videos of all the individuals participating within the art residency. You can find it on YouTube under the heading of Heritage Live. Also, one key aspect to include is that, as I've already mentioned, we really focused on inclusion across this project. So we had musicians from the Kailash Valleys, Hunza, Multan, Umarkot, Cholistan, Rahim Yar Khan, Badeen, and more, as well as more Indigenous musical instrument representation, including the Burindo, Murli, Sarinda, Randi, etc. Then we also did a project around ecotourism called the Neelam Valley Project. To give you a bit of context on how this started, we started a small-scale pilot in Gilgit-Baltistan in around 2016-2017 with 50 households under a homestay model, where we renovated local rooms of local households to sort of market them more to provide low-cost accommodation for tourists within the area. This acted as a small MVP, you can say, and then we decided to sort of replicate the project in Neelam Valley, particularly in Sharda village, whereby currently we have 17 rooms that are available to the public. An important thing to note in terms of this is that 77% of the beneficiaries of this particular program were women, and the microfinance loans were then provided to them. So this gives you a little bit of context around sort of the past projects that we've done. And I'll hand it over to my colleague to sort of give you more information on this.
Thank you, Talha. So I'm just going to keep it very short, and I'm just going to kind of dovetail into what Talha was speaking about. The last project that he spoke about was basically an ecotourism project that we recently launched in 2018 in Neelam Valley. And based on our findings from that project, we are in the process of launching a new project, which is called Ecotourism, supporting ecotourism and ecotourism businesses in Kailash and Ziyarat. So this is how the point of having this conversation is to kind of share how innovation A is in theory and then B actually in practicality. So the first step that we kind of followed in terms of this was that we identified a problem, that there was a need to promote community-led tourism, culturally focused tourism in order to minimize a negative impact on the environment. We found that there was a need to enhance local capacities in ecotourism businesses so that there could be income generation opportunities. And we also felt that there was a need to generate employment and self-employment opportunities, particularly amongst the youth. When we saw all of these factors kind of come up in Neelam Valley, we also found that similar issues were being faced in a couple of other regions of Pakistan where otherwise tourism is very popular, but the environment is being damaged because of the increase in tourism as of over the past couple of years. So PPF designed, we at the innovations team designed a solution which was basically a 2-year pilot project that focuses on promoting community-based ecotourism. And we designed some intended outcomes that we wanted to enhance the capacity of the local communities and the youth by setting up a homestay concept, which is basically Airbnb. Airbnb का concept लेके हम कुछ communities के पास गए और हमने कहा कि अगर आपके पास हम आए, हम कुछ इन्वेस्टमेंट करें, हम एक नया प्रोजेक्ट लॉन्च करें जिसके अंदर बजाय इसके कि नए नए होटल्स खड़े होते जाएं, हम आपकी एग्जिस्टिंग इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर और बिल्डिंग्स को यूटिलाइज करें और उन्हीं को इस तरह से रेनोवेट और रिवैम्प कर सकें कि यू गाइस आर एबल टू host different tourists and different travelers from across Pakistan and even from across the globe. Would you guys be interested? And there was a lot of uptake that we found in that. And so the model that we kind of ran in Neelam Valley was what we are trying to now replicate in other regions. And in combination of that, we also added a couple of other activities. We layered on a couple of activities, which included that we wanted to create a network for these businesses to be able to engage with government stakeholders, private sector stakeholders, tour operators, etc., who could all play a very vital role in improving the tourism, ecotourism concept within these regions. And lastly, we also felt that there was a lot of potential in the youth of these regions, and there were a lot of business ideas that the youth had, and they, including they belong to hospitality sector, ICT sector, textile sector, etc., and we felt that we could in combination also support these youth-led businesses while carrying out these interventions. So the target regions that we found where there was a lot of potential was Ziyarat, and of course there is Kailash in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Ziyarat in Balochistan. These are the 2 regions where we intend on piloting this program. And to briefly share the interventions that we have planned, as of now, they basically include setup of camps, camping pods, coupled with renovations of existing rooms. Like I said, rather than setting up new infrastructure, our focus is going to be on utilizing this existing infrastructure. And how we are going to do this, we're going to disperse loans by collaborating with different partners. Like Venus said earlier, now in the innovation space, generally the misconception is कि innovation का मतलब है कि digital होगा या technology होगी. But we really feel कि ऐसा नहीं है. Innovation का मतलब बहुत कुछ हो सकता है. Anything that hasn't been tried and tested before, that's the sort of model that we kind of want to use over here, and iteratively. Some things might fail, some things might work. So our focus is going to be कि हम different partners को link करें, capacity building करें local businesses की in hospitality management, culinary skills, business management, marketing. Solid waste management का एक component जरूर include करेंगे, because at the end of the day, the issue is that tourists come in a large influx, they leave a large mess behind, which is going to be impacting the environment. And that's something we really want to work on. And of course, social media marketing का concept include करना चाहते हैं rather than traditional marketing. And finally, what we want to do is we want to connect the local youth-led businesses with the incubation space. We want to make sure कि entrepreneurial ecosystem के साथ उनके ऐसे linkages develop हो कि at the end of the day, PPF हो या ना हो, हमारा partner हो या ना हो, they're able to do good quality work. So the estimated target is that we're going to help around 100 homes or campsites, and at the same time, we want to support 24 high potential businesses. Summing it up, basically our way forward right now is that we're in the process of launching this pilot on ground with the support of local communities and a partner organization. Like I said earlier, our focus is going to be to create an enabling environment where public-private partnerships are going to be leveraged, including government, telcos, perhaps even the Serenas and the PCs of these regions. Whoever we can engage and whoever wants to buy into this project, we're going to try and get them on board. And finally, like Venus said, we're going to keep a very human-centered approach. We're going to continuously trying to collect feedback from the community on what they think, how we can improve the model. We're going to keep trying to keep modifying our activities based on learnings. And subsequently, जो aim है हमारा in the largest scheme of things वो है कि improved outcomes हो and maximum benefit हो local communities का. At the end of this entire thing, the end goal is that we are able to scale this project in other regions of Pakistan as well by identifying donors, funders, corporates, etc., who are also interested in such a project, and they're willing to offer a matching fund or equity so that we can scale these activities in the future. So that's sort of the innovation space that we are looking at in PPAF. Thank you guys. Binesh, please, over to you.
Thank you so much. I think that's super interesting, and we can already see there's a whole new range of stakeholders that are becoming involved. If we look into our traditional development model, we are now including incubation centers and accelerators and startups and business opportunities. And all of this is really relevant for the future, especially with the new kinds of jobs that will emerge in a few years from now. So very quickly, I also realized I did not introduce myself. So I am Binesh, and I head the UNDP Innovation Accelerator Lab program here in Pakistan. And our lab is part of a network of 90 labs across the world that are all dedicated to doing development differently. And here at UNDP Pakistan, our focus is largely to test exactly how PPAF said, also to test new ways of working, new tools, new methodologies, also identify the emerging frontier challenges of the future. So we have work around circular economy and digital transformation. And then also we're very much about connecting to new partnerships and building an ecosystem where we can share learnings around innovation and development. So please do, one of my team members can put in the link, but please do go on our website. All of our latest work and information is there. And later this year, we also hope to release some toolkits and reports for all of you to learn. So now I'm just going to hand over to my colleagues on my team, Ehsan Gul, who's the head of experimentation, and Javeri, who's the head of solutions mapping. And these guys are going to talk about our really interesting program up in Hoshe Valley, which is called the Social Innovation Platform Approach. Over to you guys.
Thank you, and really thankful to PPAF for sharing the case study. It was interesting to know the work. So innovation, again, when we inculcate it, it's often not even about anything new. It's really about looking at things from a different perspective and trying to experiment to see how, if trying differently, can work. So we, in our service offerings, have a lot of, we have a big toolkit of different tools, frameworks, methodological aspects that allow us to customize our offerings as per projects and proposals, to try and ensure that there is a strong underlining of human-centered elements so that it's very, very co-created and empathetic in nature. So today we'll be sharing one framework with you as a case study. So it's called the Social Innovation Platform Work. We're currently applying this approach in Hoshe Valley of Gilgit-Baltistan, largely to address the socio-economic challenges. We started the project a little before COVID, but then when COVID happened, we have pivoted it to also ensure that the side and effect of pandemic is catered to it. So again, this is an approach which is iterative in nature. It's not linear. So maybe we can take a minute and discuss what linear and non-linear is. So linear is anything that is very projectized, step 1, 2, and 3. And you, before the process unfolds, you have a pretty good idea of what it will result in. A non-linear approach, however, is very organic, it's very iterative, and each component of it builds on the other component. So for example, you're conducting research. Your research can also have aspects of testing and trying and using those learnings to again inform further research questions. So similarly, as we move forward, there's a lot of community interaction, doing consultation during experimentation phase. So each component kind of feeds onto each other. It allows us to be agile. It allows us to pivot. It allows us to make sure that we are doing a more substantial work. So can we go to the next slide? Yes. So social innovation platform approach is very participatory in nature. it has to make sure that you have a variety of stakeholders. You are applying a variety of methodologies, and you're doing a set of interventions that build on each other as opposed to one big project. So you basically are intervening through different small scale projects and interventions that feed onto each other. And then in the end, what happens is that you're able to get a lot of learnings, you're able to identify new stakeholders, you're able to make a dent in this system. So why we talk about system is because the social problems are very complex and they're interdependent on multiple aspects. By moving one aspect, all the other gets affected. So our approach is to ensure that we're targeting the problem and our interventions are, targeting them at a systemic level. So essentially, one very important aspect is to listen from the community. So that is what we call deep listening. And there are a variety of ethnographic and digital tools that can be used to hear what the community actually says, with the understanding that people often don't know what they want. So we're listening at a deeper level to understand what they're not even saying. So there's a lot of observation, there's a lot of co-creation, there's a lot of portfolio development. And as you can see in the next slide, we have a timeline. I'll quickly run you through it, and you can see how connected it is with multiple stakeholders. So we always start by breaking the methodology so that there is, from the get-go, there's buy-in from the stakeholders. There's always, and at every stage, analytical work. We hear the stories and then we sync them with our projects. We use persona development to understand who each persona is and how much they influence the system and how the influences they're getting from the system. So right now we are in the process of identifying more stakeholders who can actually be on ground for us and implement. And at the same time, we're in the process of testing or stress testing our hypothesis. And then later we'll be implementing. So how we did this during COVID, our deep listening usually would be going to the community, doing a lot of consultation sessions, doing a lot of immersive research. But because of COVID, we were not able to travel. So we used digital tools like IVRs, blast SMSs, social media platforms to identify people and then hear from them. The questions had to be very smartly formulated using behavioral insights. So we're able to get to the root of everything. So we used a lot of robocalls. We conducted about 200 plus interviews in person. Then we did about 450 plus interactions using tech tools. Then we got all the information, we analyzed it, we pulled out insights. Those insights were turned into hypotheses. Some of those we've mentioned in the next slide. So hypothesis basically is us trying to develop a prototype saying, if you do this, then this will happen. So for example, if we want to improve healthcare for women during their pregnancy, then we need to develop a better training system and all that. So one of the emerging themes that came up during all of this work was gastronomy. So largely Hushe Valley community works around food economy. And there are a lot of patterns of thinking that came up, which were about different stories, narratives, persona development, thinking patterns, themes like reverse migration, themes like bulge of youth, the interest in entrepreneurship. So all of that we used, and then it's really important to understand how to communicate it. So we put it together in a food system map, which is to understand the entire cycle of food, from production to generation to storage, and then how each persona interacts it, the opportunities within that system that you can cap on to ensure that there is better economic opportunities for the youth and the larger community. I'm going to give it to my colleague Ihsan now, who can share more about how the portfolio was developed using this and what are some of the activities that we've planned.
Thank you, Javeria. Just before I jump into the portfolio design, few of the practitioners listening might say we all listen to the community. We're always mapping the system. We're always mapping the stakeholders. What is anything different here? It is what you do with that information, right? You analyze it in a way that you do not go too granular or too broader by really understanding that meta narrative, like mapping the system in a way that you can identify what systemic shocks you can create or will be enough to at least uh, nudge the local governance system, nudge the community or the private sector, or create that platform approach, right? Which is that you look at the problem from the multi-level, as I think Tabir was also mentioning, that the innovation is not just about one single point solution. It's not about that plaster syndrome that there's a leakage happening and you put a plaster and you think you're done. It's about engulfing the problem from multiple angles. And when we chose food economy, within food, there were many multi-layers on which we could work with, right? From farming to manufacturing to production to exporting to indigenous knowledge development, so, for further sharing, maybe exporting it, importing stuff, a lot of different dimensions happening. But then we also realized often with innovation interventions, we often get stuck with, let's say, a very small scale activity. But we then moved on to putting it across on multiple layers. Like it could be a community initiative, it could be a small, medium scale initiative, it could be a large scale initiative. Maybe it's a service which we can start, maybe it's a regulatory or a policy fix which is required, right? Trying to engulf the problem from multi angles so that we can also take a more phased approach. Maybe we don't have the bandwidth or the resources to do a large scale project right now, but at least it's part of the portfolio. So when we use the word portfolio, another accompanying word comes alongside is the logic. Now with portfolio, the logic is that it is complementarity which needs to be there, right? So things need to sync up. I'm not going in details of the prototypes because you guys can refer to them, but for us, within a portfolio, things need to speak to each other. They need to be interdependent. So there is a network of prototypes. So there is a support of work streams existing within. But very importantly for us, uh, something which we do not move forward without is that without identifying a house for these solutions. So when I say house, is that once they're tested and validated with the community, co-created with the community, with their buy-in, with the government partners buy-in, with the potential of funding coming from private sector or people themselves, or a sustainability strategy thought through, until or unless we do not have a scaling strategy. Now, scaling could be a replication, scaling could be a cultural shift. There are multiple ways of scaling up, scaling down, scaling in different manners. But the idea really is that the lab, whenever applies the portfolio logic, we are very much honed on to identifying a house for these solutions as well. Right now, we're working on herbal plantation, we're working on apricot oil. One may argue एप्रिकॉट ऑयल तो वहाँ पे लोग घर में इस्तेमाल करते हैं, बट घर में ही सिर्फ इस्तेमाल करते हैं. They don't have the bandwidth or the resources or the techniques or technological advancement to then use that local product, indigenous product, to sell and make livelihood out of it, right? So these are very often people argue that innovation probably is about novelty. Maybe it's about a big dehydrator we take there and put a big machine and celebrating and putting a picture out there for celebrating innovation. No, it's about those systemic influences and that those additions of activities which we're doing there. They are very incremental in nature. Maybe it is about just bringing two groups together to sit together. But that's why I say when we create a portfolio, it's more of like portfolio of interventions, current efforts which need a little boost, and experiments or white spaces which then we can further work upon. So it's a mix of radical as well as incremental solutions, or probably something which is already happening, just needs a little push, right? So that's how we've narrowed down a lot of our work, but we majorly do persona development. We understand the community. We keep listening to the community. What was a reality a year ago, that what misses or is missing in the innovation, or sorry, development world, is that the concept note was developed 5 years ago, And still, and when we do the impact indicators 5 years later, we are like, but the realities have shifted, and we just put it in the risk section that things might change. But that's not enough. You keep listening. So that's when Javeria was saying it's not a linear process. So the listening continues so that you can be agile and you can make shifts into your program accordingly. And that's a call out for both the government partners as well as the development partners, also the donor partners, to have built in that agility so the portfolio can be implemented. I'll stop here and pass it back to Beenish. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to, before we go into the discussion, I just want to check in with either Tabir or Talha. We can see right now from both the presentations that we are really talking about co-creation and working with the communities. I see both sides have used slightly different approaches, but both sides are emphasizing on community and working with different stakeholders and engaging private sector eventually. Tabir and Tala, can you tell me and the audience that the way you use human-centered design, for instance, or the way you're involving communities, how is it different from the traditional way? What was different in this case?
So I think, Binesh, that's a great question. This is different in the sense that the scale of the intervention was so small that we first launched a very tiny project in a different context in a different region. Then there was a slight modification and the same project was launched in a different region. Now, based on those learnings, we are launching the project in another region. So essentially, the model, the foundation of the model might have remained the same, that our core was the community focus, but we increased the funding, we added more complexity and layers in the project design. And at the end of the day, we also kept room for further modifications during the project phase. Even right now, our Neelam Valley project has not closed. We're still in the process of, executing that project. And again, what we've done is we've identified learnings from the initial 17 households that we helped in Neelam Valley. We took their learnings, and now we found out that that project was launched in Sharda. And now that we're trying to go back into Sharda, we found that Sharda is kind of completely saturated. They have an influx of tourists, and they're like, we don't want to, expand more. We don't want to renovate more houses or launch another Airbnb model over here. So instead, we kind of rerouted ourselves to another region called Tejia and Dudenal. So again, the process is different, that it's always fluid. That's essentially the key difference. And of course, in the sense of the fluidity means that there's going to be a fluidity in partners, there's going to be a fluidity in our approach, there's also going to be a flexibility that is going to be required in terms of the scale of the intervention. We might add households, we might have to reduce households, we might have to change our approach entirely. So that's the key difference from usual development sector projects.
Thank you. That makes sense, and I think it resonates. Quick question to either Javeria or Hassan, whoever wants to take this on. What is your reflections when Tabir mentions that this was very fluid and, of course, very iterative? From your approach, do you feel that approach was just as fluid and iterative? And if so, did you feel like you gathered insights that you wouldn't have possibly gathered from traditional design or a baseline?
I think that's a very important point, and it totally hits home, because if you are very rigid with your research, then the research is very assumption-based. It starts with biases. It's only about being fluid, open and observant that you actually gain true insights. So if I go with preset notions and I draft a survey with those solid questions, I may miss out on things. So as a practitioner of ethnography, one of the main rules is, which I hinted on earlier as well, is that people often don't know what they want, and they're not good at telling you what they want. So even if they are in a problem and you go and you try to investigate it through conversations, you can miss out on certain things because they are looking at it from a different perspective. So that is why contextualizing research is key. And that is what helps you pull out insights. The space of unobviousness that we actually operate in is where you're able to get really good insights that enable you to strategize the next steps forward. And so I'm totally all about being open and being fluid. I think rigidity and innovation don't work together.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry, Asan, did you want to say something? Okay.
No.
Okay, so I think, some key takeaways I see here is with innovative processes, whether you're using human-centered design or the social innovation platform approach as the lab has presented, there's some key points that we have to remember that are different. So when we do a log frame, although you're planning for theory of change and you're making the assumptions, etc., the problem is things go exactly like this in one linear line. And we make a lot of assumptions about how interventions will look like 5 years from now, and we go into implementation mode. We kind of need to break this through innovation and create the reflection mechanism. And so what we do also is we try to iterate in 30-day, 90-day cycles as the new way. So you look at your interventions and you're open to changing them. And that's what I hear from both sides of the project, making room in the program design for those changes. Okay, so with that, let's go to our panel kind of open conversation with our speakers today. And with us, we have, in addition to Ehsan and Javeri, who you know, we have Aisha Salma, who is the Group Head Quality Assurance Research and Development at PPAF. And we also have Rohma Labib, who's the Innovation Specialist for Strategic Innovation at PPAF. So welcome to both of you. And I just want to kick off with a question to everyone, but we will start with Aisha. Just tell us about your role in the organization and what really does innovation mean for on-ground practitioners. I have other questions, but let's just start with this. First to you, Aisha.
Thank you so much, Roma. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's a real pleasure to co-host this webinar with UNDP colleagues, and thank you, Binesh, for moderating this for all of us. A great conversation to have this afternoon on innovation and the role of innovation in development. As Binesh said, my title here at PPAF is as Group Head for Quality Assurance Research and Design, which means I oversee M&E and research, comms, IT, and resource mobilization functions. And I think that presents quite a natural harmony in the multifunctional, multidisciplinary approach we at PPAF take, like you guys do at UNDP, to innovating for better program designs. Binesh, to your question on what innovation means to me, I think a few things. First of all, as it relates to our very mission at PPAF to transform the lives of the poor for a more equitable and prosperous Pakistan, and we talk about SDG 1 and the government's commitment to improving and really reducing the number of people living below the poverty line from 24.3% to 9% by 2030. I think when it comes to that very, very bold national ambition that we all espouse, innovation is indispensable to that, right? And I think it's indispensable for a number of reasons. First and foremost, people of our country and other countries, the poor, deserve better. They deserve better development. They deserve better solutions. We as a sector are tired of hashing the same old designs and log frames that you talked about and the baselines and needs assessments. I think people deserve better. That's for me the highest motivating factor. The second thing is the reality of the funding constraints. Around the world for the last few years, we're seeing cutbacks in overseas aid commitments from the traditional bilateral institutional donors. You saw the British government just this year cut back its aid from 0.7% to 0.5% of its GNI to overseas aid, which has huge ramifications as it's one of the big donors. And there are so many other such examples. But it's not just COVID-19 that's responsible for those kinds of cutbacks, right? In middle income countries, as Pakistan has graduated to a middle income country, there is donor fatigue to our country. There is also a reality of a challenging operating environment for civil society. In all of this, we need to innovate to remain relevant as a relevant service provider to the poorest people that in whose name we seek to serve and have better program designs. And I think innovation takes place best in times of resource scarcity. When we've all got loads and oodles of money in a humanitarian crisis, there's hardly innovation in those programs, right? We've all done that, been there. But when we have the least amount of funding, I've seen often in my own experience as well, that's where we tend to innovate the most. And the third thing, I think, for organizations like ours, I would say at PPAF as a large national apex organization, as well as UNDP, a global organization, we have the opportunity to take things to scale. We have the vantage point to be looking at best practice examples, good models of work across Pakistan, across different countries, that we can inspire other people to learn from, that we can try to introduce in different, comparable contexts in Pakistan and see if it flies or not. So I think there are all those sort of motivating factors regarding why innovation really is dear to me. I think it's indispensable to development, and really we have to innovate in order to remain relevant.
Thank you, Aisha. There's a lot of points you've made, and we'll pick up on some of them later on. Roma, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ganesh, and thank you so much for having me. I'm usually on the other side of the table, as many of my colleagues know from PPAF moderating. So it's great to be here and be able to share kind of aspects around what PPAF specifically, the innovation unit, wants to get done, and the vision that we have in the future to be able to transform development for everyone in Pakistan, not just PPAF, not just like larger organizations, but also the smaller kind of grassroots level organizations that are continuously actually doing implementation, which is where the innovation actually translates into what's happening on ground. So it's very important to have these kind of conversations and have that messaging, just like Aisha said, to give the people what they deserve in the type of work that we're doing. So I'm gonna just quickly introduce myself. I'm the innovation specialist for strategic innovation at PPAF. So what that means is really looking at, like the title suggests, looking at strategy, looking at how kind of innovation can be added into existing work that PPAF does, but also how we can see what the work that we do, like the ecotourism project that my colleagues have presented, how that can be, seen in various aspects. So what are the foundations that we're laying in these kind of projects? What works, what doesn't? Is entrepreneurship a core concept that we want to integrate into other programs at PPAF as well? And things like that. And at the same time, I won't talk about what innovation means for me, because that's like a whole long conversation, but I will talk about the vision that I personally am bringing to the innovation unit at PPAF. Is, I think for a long time, innovation as a word has been used repeatedly to just say, out of the box thinking, invention, basically, new things to do, new ways to do things. But really, slowly the world has been turning into this space where we have continuous new things coming out by different players, by different stakeholders. You have this huge, amazing startup space, which is growing like anything at the moment in Pakistan. People coming out with different solutions, which are actually efficient and effective, and like Aisha mentioned, just don't have the opportunity to scale. So I think increasingly the vision is moving more from invention to infusion and integration, right? Understanding what available things are out there instead of reinventing the wheel, and seeing how that can be actually put in the context of development work per se. So many things happening in the innovation unit that are really exciting. We have a lot of colleagues online as well. We're looking to see how we can actually create entrepreneurship, because it is that sustainability aspect that we look at in innovation, how we can keep that as like a basis, how we can provide some kind of a equity funding through an innovation fund in the upcoming months, upcoming days, and also see how we can support this kind of thinking in the future from our unit, and then scaling it up to the rest of PPF and also our partner organizations. We're implementing our projects and actually trickle it down to what's happening in on ground at grassroots level. So yeah, over to you.
Thank you. And again, another really important point that I'm gathering from Aisha and Roma, which is also quite in line with us, to have a strategic vision and a focus and the why of what innovation is in your organization is extremely important. We have seen previously in our experiences, when you do not define what innovation means for your organization and you don't have the strategic kind of clarity, it can fall. Pilots will continue happening and they will go nowhere. But in this case, there's a financing aspect, there's the why, there's a vision, which is extremely important. With that, I'm going to give it to Hassan.
Maybe I'll pick on to what Bina said, that as organizations, you need to have that strategic, like the vision needs to be set for what the boundaries need to be set a little, okay, in what space innovation related activities you'll be doing. And that also then helps the organization put a budget behind it, right? Until unless there are no financial resources associated to experimentation, and that appetite to fail is more acceptable, and there is this let's say a culture, a creativity culture being introduced, innovation won't happen. And innovation silos, innovation is always happening in organization. You can sit on the side, you can sit on the periphery, you're the cool kids in the town, you paid well, and you're just doing innovation on your own. But if until and unless it's not translated to the core of the organization, we are not doing our job right, or maybe we have to rethink the way the organization is structured. Having said that, alongside with this, it's also very important that the people working in the innovation teams need to also understand that we often go in the room and tell people, okay, do things differently, and we're telling you this is how it should be done. Rather, it's more of a co-creative process, co-creation process. Listen to those people. They're also struggling with service delivery pressures. They're struggling with majorly development sector is struggling with reporting and reporting to the donors. So they're also fatigued, right? So be more empathetic towards your development counterparts as well, and try to understand the mentality they function with. Yeah. We can discuss other things later. Yeah.
Tell a little bit about your role.
Oh, my role. As the name suggests, it's about experimentation. So a lot of it is about systems doing, right? So my colleague Javeria is more of a thinker, helps me design the system, brings me these wonderful actionable hypotheses, and then my role is to really build upon them. And that is through working with grassroots level solution providers, working with startups, working with younger people, working with my development practitioners and counterparts to really act as a sponge to really bring all these actors together to put into perspective and action the hypotheses which we've identified. Once we've validated those hypotheses and turned them into a solution, we don't leave it here. As I said in my presentation, it's very important for us to have a scaling strategy identified as well. And then we pass on those learnings regionally, globally, as well as within our country office, and now through our community of practice concept and this work we're doing, we want to share the failures as well, because it's not all glitters and gold, and it's very difficult to experiment in Pakistan, especially when you're telling the word experiment to a government partner. They're like, so what, and what to do with it. So it's difficult, but I think it's a challenging role, but fun to work with the innovation landscape. Yeah.
And last but not least, Javeria, tell us about your role and what innovation for development means.
So I think I have the funniest title, it's Head of Solutions Mapping. What that means is that I have to get out of the air-conditioned office, go out in the community, and find local innovators in their solutions. So I look largely at the systemic design and strategic foresight stream through ethnographic premises and really trying to bridge the gap between people, policy, and programming. I think that innovation is all about improving something. If we are coming up with something really interesting, intriguing, but complex, we're adding complication to the system. As innovative as that may be, it doesn't help anyone. So for me, innovation and using out of ordinary approaches and working differently is all about maintaining the balance between the big picture and the smaller initiatives. So it's really a constantly between macro and micro, so as not to lose the perspective of what you're doing and why you're doing. And at the same time, really organizational development to improve systems, processes, microsystems. So they should make lives easier for the team, for the stakeholders, for the community. And I think that the biggest thing that kills innovation is short-sightedness. That is why it's all about, even the strategic vision is in place to look ahead in future, to have a foresight plan, to have a futures lens as to what are parallel trends, how is your proposal going to yield different results and impact all the multiple factors around it. So often it's a really fun job trying to balance different things, and just, frustration is a very important part of it. If there's no frustration, that means something's missing.
Thank you. Thank you. I think all extremely important points, and let's pick on them later on in the discussion. I think it's also important that the idea of scale, the idea of integration and infusion, as Roma said, came up, which I thought was a very interesting point. So let's talk about how do we make this work happen? What does it take for projects, for us to make an innovation project a reality? And then where do we take it? What does scale mean, right? So like Roma, let's start with you. In terms of the ecotourism project, how will we integrate it next? And what are the next steps for it?
Sure. So I think I'll go back to your first point around, what are the main aspects now involved when you talk about planning for innovation or out of the box thinking? And I think this is very relevant, or this was part of the thinking why we actually started thinking around this webinar, was because we want the people listening and development practitioners to start rethinking the way they write their proposals, the way they would design their projects. What is the basis of doing it? Are they just adding sustainability as just a tick mark, or like a section where they're saying, yes, this project will be, taken on by someone else afterwards, and then that just leads you into that vicious cycle of donor dependency again and again? Or are they actually keeping sustainability as a constant foundation within the program design, within what's going to happen, instead of having it afterwards? And that automatically means that you're handing over the baton to the community to do their own development, rather than you handing over development to them in a place. And that's where ecotourism, I think, comes in as well. And also other projects which we're designing in the innovation unit, and where kind of the vision we're moving towards is all around, those basic concepts or foundations that we're outlaying. Either it's entrepreneurship, skills development, these kind of things, where we're equipping the community with resources rather than just handing them over cash, right? And a lot of times what happens in many projects, even we've been part of it or things like that, is that when you all of a sudden see a bump and there's like a stop in the middle and there's kind of a problem that you're facing, you, instead of going into out of box thinking, you just move towards more traditional designs because you're just like, we know exactly what's going to be the outcome here. And you're meeting certain KPIs of set. And I think this comes back to the donor dependency problem. You're meeting set KPIs that someone else has set and you haven't set as a designer, right? So all of that kind of like makes your growth and innovation very stagnant. So it's very important to lay this as a foundation. So ecotourism, other projects that we're doing have that foundation, and that's what we want to integrate into the strategy as well, to equip and to make those communities self-sufficient in many ways. Now we talk around and why we talk, and when we talk about entrepreneurship, a lot of times it's very traditional, you know, are we giving them assets for agriculture? Are we giving them, you know, assets for something else? But at the same time, are we giving them, and this is a very controversial topic in development, are we giving them the skills? Is, you know, soft skills and behavioral change still part of development as a whole? Does that lead to the theory of change that you're trying to achieve in an impact context? So all of these things are conversations, and I think the best part is finding the right balance, right? Not doing asset transfers and things like that, which will actually lead to 100% dependency, but kind of integrating it with the type of skills that they would need to take that stuff forward. And that's it. And in ecotourism, I mean, like Sabir mentioned, there's all these various skills that we're providing, and we're actually improving as we move towards different locations. So in the first location, for example, we probably didn't have the aspect of financial literacy as a core training in that project. But now when we're moving it to, say, Ziyarat or, you know, our future locations that we're doing this project in, these are core things that we found are actually going to help them understand when they do move towards revenue generation, what to do with that money, where to put it, how to save, things like that. So that's going to lead to their long-term impact. So this is just an example. Another thing is that we've actually been doing a very detailed evaluation for one of our, and this goes back to Javeria's point, continuous reiteration and feedback loops, and understanding and doing M&E of all your work to understand what the real impact was, where were the gaps still seen, and how we can improve it in the next system. So one of our projects, we're doing a detailed evaluation study for it, and we're seeing that there were little things that could have been changed, like how long the training could have been, you know, in what ways it could have been delivered, that would have actually affected the end goal or outcome. So these are things that maybe also doing research to understand, you know, your end user behavior and things like that, and how we can integrate that back in. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think also, again, I'm just hoping that the audience is also just getting an idea of what scale kind of looks like, and how important the iteration aspect is at every point. You know, at every point we are literally designing for reflection and iteration. And you know, scale can mean many different things also, right? You know, with that, I also want to sort of go back to Aisha. And, you know, Aisha, I know you're heading, you know, you're heading the monitoring learning program, etc. And in order to think about scale, and in order to really embed the innovation work into the organization, I'm sure you face resistance. There might be bottlenecks or challenges that may come up. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about what those challenges are that a practitioner could expect to face, and how you address them?
Thank you, Dinesh, for that question. And I think a couple of other panelists sort of alluded to that in their responses to your earlier question as well. If you allow, I'd just like to begin by giving a success example of what scale we achieved at PPAF as well. You know, in 2008, we started targeting the ultra poor, right? With borrowing an approach for poverty graduation that was tried and tested in Bangladesh by BRAC. And we brought it to Pakistan, and other organizations took it to a few other countries as well that year. And we did it because prior to that, PPF was primarily focusing on financial inclusion, doing its microfinance work very successfully, mushroomed the sector, actually nurtured it, but also was faced with the problem that it doesn't always reach the poorest of the poor, right, as a model. So what do you do with the people who are not able to borrow that level of money in order to have a better standard of living? So we started doing poverty graduation work with a few hundred households that year. By 2015, we had very, very promising results of over 179% return on investment by rigorous M&E and third-party assessments that was published externally. And that gave us confidence to scale it up, right? So in the last few years, we scaled it up to thousands more. And by 2019, we were so successful that we actually started convincing the government of Pakistan to scale it up to the national level. So today, we are doing the National Poverty Graduation Program, also known as the SARS Amdan Program, as part of the government's SARS strategy and formally recognized by them. And with their partial funding commitment to it as well, right? And this is going to now be reaching over 300 households across all 4 provinces of Pakistan. So for us, scale is that, right? And that's what we aim to do. So like my colleagues have been sharing before, it's very much about doing small prototypes, experimenting, learning, failing forward, failing fast, but also being successful sometimes, and then taking things to scale. But those journeys are never straightforward, right? And so when you talk about overcoming resistance to innovation, I think Ehsan talked about some of the perceptions of what how an innovation team is usually perceived in an organization. I think I would like to add to that actually, first of all, this is not a problem that is unique to Pakistan. I worked abroad in Middle East, North Africa, London for over a decade, and I can tell you we had the same problems in different large international organizations. So, and everywhere, there is a need to set up an institutional arrangement where innovation can flourish in a free space. Now, what happens in our kind of large organizations, and it is primarily a large organization phenomena, large and I would say long-standing organization with a history, and sometimes you kind of cripple over your own weight. And you can run across the problem of fresh thinking, which is kind of sometimes at odds with our compliance systems, with certain ways of working, mindsets. And that's not an unusual problem to expect, right? Because remember, and I think we always have to do this with a dose of humility when we feel frustrated, is remembering that these organizations, large organizations, did innovate years ago, and that's why they are where they are right now. What we're trying to do is maintain their relevance, the relevance of the solutions that they're offering to the people they serve, right? So it's also about the way we engage with our colleagues in the rest of the organization, about reassuring them and respecting them that they did innovate once upon a time. We are wanting to work together and making sure that we are able to join forces to achieve the same mission. I think success builds on success, right? In anything that we do with innovation or any new thing we're trying to introduce. So the more you can take people along, the more excitement that you can build and give people a stake in participating in that change, right? What's in it for them? What's in it for our colleagues to innovate, right? There's no point telling each other that we need to innovate. People need to buy into that idea and see what's in it for them, what motivates them. And I think important point to remember here is also that when we are talking about innovation, we have to remember that we are not the first ones doing it, right? We are doing this for the people that we work with, the people that we serve. The language that we use in innovation can sometimes be very exclusive, right? Even to the rest of our development colleagues, let alone the people that we are serving. A lot of this discourse, prototyping, ideation, these are things that some of us are exposed to, but the vast majority of people are colleagues. And I always feel a little, I would say, upset that that language is so exclusive for the people that we serve, right? And the modules, the curriculum that we use are not in the language that they speak. The terminology that we use are not in the language that they use to understanding. And I think here is the role of human-centered design, right? It starts from the foundation of empathy. Now, empathy requires us to not assume that people don't know how to articulate their needs or know what their needs are. Actually, we need to become better listeners and know how to engage with them, converse with them, and understand, ask the right questions, and listen to them in the language that they speak, right? And I mean that sort of language in both in terms of language as well as terminology and an approach and everything. So I think lots of things in terms of overcoming resistance within the organization, but really doing it with empathy, with our colleagues, being patient, because in this realm, and we're all first of all join this sector to make a difference, right? However small little difference we want to make in the world, and when we look at it from that larger vantage point, we've got to learn how to work with all diversity and shades of people. And actually, in the development sector, we've got a lot of progressive mindsets. It's just about being able to talk to them and influence them, and also listen to them. People are innovating all the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we are also on our last 5 minutes. So I just want to go through our panelists very quickly, and then I see a very interesting question that we can also address. So Javeria, like in 30 seconds or less, Aisha brought up a point about empathy and how important that is. And as we are, I know you have worked very much on systems thinking and building up using these entirely new approaches with our colleagues at UNDP. What is it that you have said to them to get them comfortable by using this new approach?
30 seconds. I think the first thing I always say is that I would like to learn from you. Can you guide me on this? Because the work that they're doing, where I'm going to involve, is first and foremost theirs. So you have to understand that you're actually, I'll take forward Aisha's point about humility. You have to actually put yourself or place yourself as a team member and gain their trust, and not to underestimate the slowness of the innovative processes. They're very, very slow and very small also. So it's about understanding that you have to be patient, you have to learn from them, and only when you know how to construct something can you deconstruct. I mean, it may be a segue of an example, but Picasso spent a lot of time learning how to correctly draw a guitar before he actually deconstructed it. So I think that that's the level of understanding you have to take forward. And there are still challenges there. You need to be heavily involved in follow-ups, but that's just part of the process. But it's really like positioning yourself not just to them, but also to yourself, that you're going in to learn.
Excellent answer. And also, I'm just seeing in the chat, someone, Alia, has written, I guess the role of anthropologists as stakeholders really missing in the development sector, and we need to address that. Absolutely. I think that is really key. Having different capacities is the way we have learned innovation can happen. So as someone who's heading a team, I have to tell you that having those expertise on team is extremely key. Now, very quickly, in 30 seconds or less, Ihsan, can you also talk about some of our plans? We have the portfolio logic going, we have the stakeholders, we've convinced everyone. Can you go on about how we're now bringing these different actors on board, like the private sector, like the investment work? How should everyone think about that?
So the strategy, of course, guides this, right? There needs to be a framework that these are the people in terms of the power and the influence of different stakeholders you identify, and then you're like, okay, that's how we're going to bring them together. But it's very tactful as well. Like you need to be like there are a lot of tactics you need to bring in. Maybe it's about sometimes ego massaging. Maybe it's sometimes about bringing these people onto a webinar, or sometimes it's about just going there and doing a free workshop. At times innovation team is called in to do workshops for free, and that's what they think it's our role. But then that's where you need to have that insight of how these partners can be brought in and made relevant to the country office needs and your portfolio needs. So as someone who's on the end of bringing all the stakeholders together, you need to have that longevity lens in your mind. Maybe others can't see it. You need to have that zoomed out approach in the way you work, that what they can't see right now, what others can't see right now, you can potentially see that where they fall in the innovation value chain or in the project value chain, and then work towards it. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, that was really quick. There's literally 1 minute left. Maybe we could take a couple of more minutes. So I understand if audiences need to kind of leave, feel free to leave, or we can just answer a couple of questions. So I have this question on my chat, which says, well, as part of my understanding, innovation includes bringing new aspects in and adding new values that refurbish the existing context to more appealing ones at stakeholder. Actually, no, this is not the one I wanted to read. There was a question about how do you make innovation kind of happen? Yes, can you please shed light on what major frameworks are we using at PPF and Innovation Lab? I'm in transitions research, and here we mostly work on multi-level perspectives and technical innovation system. So what are we building on to solve systemic level questions? From PPAF, who would like to answer that?
Aisha, do you want to go ahead? Because you're more well-versed with project design.
Thank you. As my colleague said, we're increasingly looking to do more human-centered design approach. But the reality often gets in the way of, very short proposal deadlines when we're looking at submissions and pursuing some of the larger funding opportunities. But to overcome that, that's why we have a team, the innovation team, who actually here, has the opportunity where we, as a senior management team, look at the ideas that they've generated with communities and invest our own resources to prototype and test. Right, and only when we provide a proof of concept through rigorous M&E and research, are we able to say to donors that here, this is something that's tried and tested. Here is how we can scale it up to other districts, other provinces. So, by and large, that's been our approach: start small, pilot, and then take it forward. Because of the kind of funding opportunities we pursue, as I said, when it comes to the larger funding opportunities, we are required to do all those rigorous baselines and needs assessments as well. But when we're putting in our own funding into pilots, that's where we have more opportunity and more time for human-centered design. Because I think this is something that is required, right? And that's why we have these kinds of innovation institutional arrangements. Innovation requires time and a risk appetite to assess whether something is feasible, to invest more money to do it. So prototyping is all about low-cost experimentation, fundamentally, in a simple way.
Binesh, I'll quickly add.
If you want to add.
Yeah, I'll quickly add to that. I think because the type of work that especially we do at a small scale is very high risk, right? So innovation automatically translates to high risk, and why then that happens to be your own kind of resources and not external funding, which actually goes well with the type of innovation you're doing, because you don't have to have that kind of, continuous M&E and continuous KPIs that you need to follow. Because it's so high risk, external donors are usually not looking to fund in those untapped markets or in these kind of like new things until they're kind of proven. which is why when we go to scale, we use this very, I think PPF's MER unit is very, very strong. We're using all of this evaluation and understanding of what the impact actually was to feed into our next project rationale. So it's very evidence-led. I think that's one of the strengths that PPF uses. And I think it's very useful to make sure that you're providing a very concrete rationale for whatever you're going out to do and actually saying, why you're doing it, what was actually effective last time.
Okay, thank you. Now there's just actually so many interesting questions. I'm just going to do one last question. We will have to skip over asking the lab this one. We'll just do one question, and I think Javeria can answer this. How do you ensure that the innovation projects are not prescriptive, but rather rooted in inherent jugaad culture that defines so much of our community, where limited resources have always bred intelligent improvisational approaches? Javeria, the solution mapper, can answer this.
So thank you for this question, and thank you for bringing in the term jugaad. We're all a fan of that. How do we ensure it? We actually make sure that our process, which is non-linear, has after every interval a very strong kind of a hands-on component to it. So for example, if we're working on the plastic waste project, we conducted a solutions fest, which was all about jugaad. So it was about inviting designers, industrial designers, researchers, environmentalists to one makerspace, giving them really trash and left out plastic material and ask them to give it a second life. And that second life, that process of giving it second life, the products that came out were really all about tinkering and jugaad. And then we take learnings from it. So actually over the time of a weekend, one group who was participating burnt plastic waste into biogas. A secondary product is created. So we use learnings from that, bring those learnings into our prototypes of experiments, and then also take that to industry to share that, here are other stakeholders this is how you can come in and work together. Because again, I think the best synonym for innovation is jugaad, because it's about quick fixes, leveraging on what is in front of you. And we're all about, crowdsourcing information, crowdsourcing ideas. So I've actually shared a link to our website and our blog, but also keep a lookout on the conversations that we do on social media, because we're always, sourcing ideas, solutions that you've done, how to map it, how to create repositories, and then link it. It's very important to link it with industry and policy so that it takes up.
Thank you so much. I see Zulfikar Durrani asking how organizations like UNDP could work with government and try to promote innovation lens and official working. Honestly, this is an entire webinar in itself. I would love to get into it, but we are really running out of time. And we are happy to, if this is our UNDP Zulfikar Durrani, then we can definitely talk to you. But it's a lot of buy-in, it's a lot of patience, it's a lot of explaining the big picture. And number one is finding your champion and then connect them to your innovation team, and we will work with you from there. And it's also like tactics versus strategy, right? You do a little bit in order to get to the big picture. So with that, I will not take any more time. Thank you to our panelists for this wonderful conversation. Thank you also to our presenters earlier for an amazing overview of innovation projects. And thank you to the audiences for staying all the way till the end, even though we went over time. We really hope that you found this discussion very useful and that you could pick up some practical tips and tools on how you can get started. If you still have more questions, please get in touch with us at the Innovation Lab, and of course the PPAF team, or call us in together. We are happy to do more conversations and meet with you with one-on-one conversations. And I understand there will also be, the teams will send you a recording of the webinar and any keynotes and key email addresses to get connected. So thank you everyone for attending, and I hope you have a really good afternoon.
Thank you, Vinesh. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.